So now we're going to start the recording, and I'm bringing Dr. Bill Geary on. Thank you for responding. I'd hoped to make it a little more clean than that, but you know how it goes.
All right. Well, thanks, Andrea. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. I know right before the holidays, this is a busy time for everybody, so we certainly appreciate everybody logging on and taking advantage of this opportunity. As Andrea said, this was again a topic that was selected from prior webinars, listeners. So we will be giving out an evaluation when this is over. Just, kind of the usual, because we are evaluators after all, right? So this is what we do. But part of that, we'll be asking for ideas about webinars that you would like to see. So please feel free to put that in. So let's get started. This is an important topic today, talking about sustainability. But I wanted to start things off just by going over the agenda for today. And as soon as I figure out how to, do that, we'll do that. And so some things we're going to talk about, obviously the introduction, we're going to finish up in just a second. We're going to talk about the key themes of research. Most of you who read the description that was sent out pretty much lines up with that, right? We're going to talk about issues around defining sustainability. We're going to be talking about identifying the predictors for sustainability. And we're going to be talking about assessing and prioritizing, and then what role evaluation plays in all of that, right? How does that work? But the place that I want to start is I'm going to launch a poll. So if you could just kind of let us know where you're coming from, and feel free to answer multiple ones. We're just interested in what kind of initiatives you are currently interested in evaluating. Are you doing a comprehensive community-based, so like a drug-free communities grant, for example, or a SPIF-SIG grant, those kinds of things, maybe neighborhood violence prevention? Are you doing school or family-based? Are you doing some type of multi-tier or multi-site evaluation? Are you doing some other kind of evaluation, or are you doing none? So what we're going to do is we're going to launch the poll and let you tell us what your interests are, and then we'll tell you kind of how that looks. Okay, so we'll give folks about another 10, 15 seconds, and then we'll close the poll. It looks like most people right now are doing comprehensive community-based. And it looks like the numbers aren't changing. So we're going to close the poll out and put up on the screen. You can see kind of who your peers are on the call. The reason that I asked that question, of course, is because there are different types of initiatives, and we want to be able to speak to your needs, right, in terms of the language. So we're going to talk a little bit about the language. So thank you for participating in that. Lots of folks doing comprehensive community-based stuff, which is pretty much what we anticipated. So let's go back to the slideshow, and we will talk about the research. We, of course, believe in giving you best practices based on research, so we wanted to make sure that we indicated the 3 primary articles that we're using for this, if you have an interest in finding them. I don't know that any of, I think maybe the last one, the stall, might be available online for free, but I think the other 2 are probably not. They're probably pay-as-you-go. But what I will offer is this: you can get abstracts online, and if you want to talk to us about any of this research, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about any of those. So everything that we're going to cover today in terms of sustainability is located here. And let's talk first about what these 3 share in common, why we pick this, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that we could go. So why this research? And we picked this research for a few reasons. One, they all involve community health, right? Not all sustainability research does involve that. They each address specific predictors of sustainability, which is the topic, of course, that we want to be able to discuss today. Each provides a solution to understanding sustainability because there is a little bit of confusion around sustainability, as we will discuss momentarily. They all summarize general findings, that is to say, at some point in all of these articles, they talk about the current state of the field, which I think is important. And of course, they are all research-based scholarly articles. So that's what they share. So some key questions that the research attempts to address. What is sustainability is the place that we're going to start. I know that sounds like an easy question, but maybe not as easy as we may think initially. We're going to talk about what are the correlates with sustainability. Now, we could talk about predictors, but for those of us who are scientifically based, we know that there's a difference technically between a predictor and a correlate. Most of this research is not predictive, it's just correlative, right? So it's saying, let's take a look at some indicators, some behaviors, some variables that are associated with sustainability, right? They're not saying how much that causes. Now, that's important because one of the things that Andrea and I had discussed when setting this up is there is no dosage conversation here, right? Like often on our webinars, we have been able to demonstrate like which variables are key variables. This one, not so easy to do that, not so easy. We're also going to talk about how you can prioritize what needs sustaining using the research, and we're going to talk about how evaluation can enhance your efforts to do this. Now, the first step then, I think, is to talk about the process. And here's the process that we're going to walk through, and we're going to offer templates. Each one of the handouts aligns with one of these. So we're going to assess strategy worthiness first. That is to say, looking at what strategies are worth keeping. We're going to talk about identifying strategy components because this is particularly true for the majority of us who are on this call, the comprehensive community-based, right? We're not just doing one program, say, right? According to the CDC, though, a program is a comprehensive community-based initiative, right? But the programs that are being run on multi-site, multi-tier, or comprehensive typically have broad-based components that underlie those strategies that we have to do. For those of you who are familiar with the DFC program, we would kind of call those, those things that you're doing to address local conditions. We then want to assess those components in terms of worthiness because we're going to talk also about the research that says that sometimes sustainability is in pieces, not in whole units. And then we're going to talk about what we refer to as a sustainability climate and how we can assess that and try to take advantage of that. So let's start with the basic question of what is sustainability. I know, having been a CADCA trainer, National Academy trainer for 7 years, right? Sustainability is one of these things that typically people think about how much money do we have, what are the resources that we have. But in the research, sustainability takes a much broader view, right? So there is no clearly accepted definition in the literature. All 3 articles that we are talking about today specifically mention that. And one of the articles is actually going to talk about some of the multiple goals and concepts, right? Like, so how do we define sustainability? What are the various ways that we can look at sustainability? So let's talk about that. This is my diaper sustainability. This is not from the research. What I did is I just summarized the concepts and went, gee, the first letter of each word, I think, adds up to a word, and that word just happens to be diaper. So I hope you find that amusing. I don't mean to insult anybody, but some of the elements that we'll talk about in some kind of detail here is there are diffusion elements when it comes to sustainability, right? Are there pieces of the strategy or the program that can be diffused to other audiences? So for example, for those of you who are doing a school or a family-based, maybe you're only doing it in a couple of schools. Can that program, even if it's not going to be working anymore in the school that you're in, be switched over to something else. If you're doing a multi-tier or comprehensive community-based, this refers to, are you able to address other levels besides the universal level? Institutionalization is another sustainability element. Some people define sustainability as something that's institutionalized, right? So if you're running some type of program or initiative, has the funding for that program or initiative been institutionalized into somebody's budget, into somebody's practices? The best example I can think of from a comprehensive community-based, I worked with a community a while ago who, for all the underage drinking citations, a certain percentage of the fine for underage drinking immediately got kicked into prevention programs in the community. I think it was around 3% of all of those. Other types of institutionalization that you might be more familiar with in the criminal justice system, for example, would be victims' resources, right? So court fees, for some jurisdictions, they will take a percentage of those court fees and put them into victimization services. Is it adaptable? Which is to say, this was one of the primary criteria of even using some, especially under comprehensive community-based. If you're going to use a strategy, can you adapt it to your community? This refers to the idea of can you adapt it in order to sustain it, right? Is it the kind of initiative that can be adapted and tethered out easily in a different kind of environment? Partnerships is another element of sustainability. Some researchers look at the number of partnerships that are developed and are you maintaining those partnerships. So even if you're not running programs, what they're looking at here is kind of a predictor of effectiveness, right? Have you put yourself in a position where even if there are programs or initiatives that are not going to be funded anymore, are you still at the table with those same partners so that you can continue to do other kinds of work, even if it's not those specific programs? And then this term enthusiasm, right? Is the community still interested, right, in the topic? And then the reach, which is basically how many people are you reaching out to? All of these are going to be on one of the worksheets that we're going to talk about momentarily, right? And there's a definition under each of these, so you will have all of that. I don't know if Andrea mentioned it or not, but when we do get to the worksheets, it's probably a good idea to just open them right up on your desktop so that you'll be able to see them. We do put them on the slides, but it's sometimes hard to read. So let's start with the first question. No, just right away, he did not say this that I'm aware of. I just thought, he's a pretty smart guy. But I wanted to summarize the research here, right? And so when we think about sustainability, I know that a lot of coalitions, I've been doing this for 18 years now, just wow, long time. But a lot of them think about sustainability as an all or nothing kind of scenario, right? Either we keep the initiative that we're doing completely, or it completely goes away, or we may have a third grade program and we're going to run that program exactly the way it's written in full, right? But what we find is that usually when sustainability issues come up, when funding gets cut or resources get cut in some way, people still want to hold on to pieces that may be useful for them, or they may keep the whole program, but then to save cost, implement it for smaller groups. Or for comprehensive strategies, maybe you're shrinking the size of the community down a little bit. Instead of doing the whole county, maybe you're doing a town within the county, right? And this is the way that most sustainability works. I wanted to put this out here because I think that sometimes sustainability can be baffling because we look at the entire intervention set and we go, wow, this takes a lot of resources. But the reality is that probably in the world of sustainability, you're going to have to start thinking about what you need to keep and what you don't need to keep. So we're going to have this conversation, right, about what should I sustain? Because the research shows that for coalitions that have been around a long time, organizations that have been around a long time, they typically do not sustain themselves at 100% capacity when those decisions have to be made. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these elements, the diaper elements, to help us focus on the strategies and the components to make some key decisions. And these key decisions are, what are the kinds of strategies, or what we will describe in a moment as components, do we want to sustain or not sustain? And we also should be able to explain why we're going to sustain them or not, right? Because we need to be able to prioritize, and we want to make clear to everyone what that prioritization process is. So if the reasons why we're going to sustain something might change over time, then that might impact whether we want to hold on to it some more or let go of it, right? So we're going to walk through the first worksheet, and Andrea's going to walk you through them now. And what we did is, because I know it's sometimes hard to see these, just so you know, and we'll turn this over to Andrew in just a sec, but what we tried to do is we tried to kind of explode out parts of the worksheet so that when she's talking to you about how you use it and what it is, you don't necessarily have to have it open on your desktop. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to walk us through this first worksheet.
All right, so again, for those of you who have joined us on previous webinars, you'll know that every webinar, as Bill mentioned, that we conduct includes tools and templates, and these are designed with you in mind. Again, we've been in the field. We know what it's like to be on webinars and sort of not know what we're going to do after and say, gee, okay, I just spent an hour and a half, now what? Back to work. You know, of course, not everyone is going to take back what they learned today, but at least we feel as though we're really working hard to give you something that you will, even if you don't take it back this week or next week, maybe it's something you can return to at a later date. So again, the goal is that you are empowered to take some action to apply the information that we shared today. And today's webinar offers you 3 specific resources. We're going to focus primarily on 2 of them that we felt were really feasible for most of you to apply to your own work based on where we think that most people are at. The documents that I'm going to walk you through, again, as Bill said, are available in the handout section of your control panel. So hopefully you're taking a look at them as I walk through this. I want you to know that we see these documents, we adapted these documents, created them based on research, and sort of put them in our minds. They're a stepwise process. We see them as working together, and I'm going to explain how we feel that they could work together for you. I'm going to start with the first one, which you can see up here on the screen, which is the planning worksheet, and we called it, Is It Worth Sustaining? As the current project director of a coalition that has a drug-free communities grant, I really see that this tool could help us develop our action plan. We're a year 2 coalition. We have an action plan. We submitted an action plan, but there are some things that I think that we want to change. So keeping in mind that we know we have very limited resources, it's really important that we put our efforts into the things that our coalition is likely going to be able to keep going in our community over the long term. So I see it as being useful, depending on where you're at, in that sort of development planning stage. Also, I know another thing that coalitions are always doing is that action plan, the work that you're going to do, is constantly being revised and changed to the degree that you can change it to meet the needs of your community. And I think that it's helpful for us to put in place some systems and processes into these conversations that we already have with folks as we bring them to the table. Sometimes those conversations are hard to organize. It's hard to keep people on track. So I really feel like this particular tool is pretty easily digestible, doable to bring to those conversations to help us structure them around making decisions about things that we've already chosen to do, and sort of whether or not we want to continue doing them. Again, is it worthy of sustaining? So with that said, I'm going to walk through the worksheet a little bit and the instructions. We see this as being something that you would first sort of consider looking at an overall strategy. For example, if you've identified a specific risk factor in the community that you're trying to address, or if you've gone deeper to the level of, I know CADCA uses the language local conditions, you know what conditions in the community are really promoting that risk factor. And you're at the point where you have developed or are thinking of developing a comprehensive strategy using all kinds of approaches. Again, I don't want to get too heavy on sort of the CADCA language, but we talk about what came out of the University of Kansas, the 7 behavior change strategies. So sort of that overall strategy in this case, that term we're using has to do with that comprehensive overall approach that you're thinking of implementing. We see that as your first step in sort of going through this document as a group. So you can see the first piece says, okay, when we think about this overall strategy that we've developed that includes all of these potentially different components, does the strategy have specific components that can be adapted or revised while maintaining the original goals of the strategy? And you would go through with a group, and everyone could agree on sort of where you're at here and circle your items, trying to answer everything that you can. Again, thinking about that overall strategy. Are we going to reach all or most community members? Is this overall strategy going to contribute to important community level partnerships? I'm not going to read every one of them, but again, this goes through the database and the research-based information that Bill talked about. You can see that we have a citation at the end, at the bottom of the document. So that's kind of where we came up with all of these things. These are all important things that you need to consider for sustainability. Once you have done that, right, so you've determined, okay, is this overall strategy or approach something worth sustaining? Then we proposed that you could tease out some components of the strategy. So for example, alcohol compliance checks, right? That could be a component of an overall strategy to reduce underage drinking and an issue that you've identified around minors selling alcohol to youth. So you could then go through, okay, where are we at with alcohol compliance checks if we go through and do this form, complete this form around that. So again, it could be a lot, right? You have a lot going on in your action plan. So we wouldn't propose that you would go through each of those, every single thing all at once, but definitely having this in your back pocket to put on the table and really focus that conversation. So I think the next slide covers this idea of a climate for sustainability. Again, all of this was based in research that we looked at. There was, in a particular resource, 26 correlates were identified as being related to the sustainability of programs and initiatives. This idea that as organizations, as coalitions, as partners, we can create, as evaluators even, we can create a climate that will make it more likely that these things that we want to sustain will be able to sustain. So that brings us to the second worksheet. Again, these work together. So once we've decided, okay, there's an overall approach or strategy that we want to sustain, there may also be some specific components that we wanted to have a discussion about. Do we have a climate in place? Is there anything that we can do to improve our climate in all of these different levels that I'm going to walk you through right now briefly, that will be able to make it more likely that we are able to sustain these efforts that we want to sustain? And we have instructions here for this worksheet. Again, you'll see that the difference here is that we believe that here you should really just be focusing on that overall strategy, that climate of sustainability for the overall strategy, not necessarily for the individual strategy components. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind as you work through this with people in your community. Also to point out, we're going to be talking a little bit later about this, but the tool that this came from is also much longer. So we've adapted it to just be a little bit more easy to digest in your community, but Bill will talk about those of you who are working with your evaluators and sort of at a high tier level of interest in this. Maybe you'd be interested in the longer version. So let me just walk through just some of the key topic areas here. You have characteristics of the strategy itself. So again, is our overall strategy primed for sustainability? And some things in there that are based on research and evidence are things like the overall strategy can be adapted to a wide range of audiences. The overall strategy can be implemented with little training or expertise. And again, you're thinking about all the components in it. The overall strategy and sort of generally the components in it can be implemented with little training or expertise based on sound scientific research. Things like this. Again, you have this document in front of you, so I don't want to read all of them. Some other important concepts are what is the capacity of the lead partners that you have at the table that are currently or will be primarily responsible for carrying out the activities within this strategy. Do you have champions at the table? Are there key volunteers, staff who believe in the strategy? Organizational capacity of that was it on the next page. What is the capacity of the community? So thinking about out there in your community, is there support in terms of sort of sympathy for this issue, the cause that the strategy is addressing? Are there monetary resources out there potentially to support this? Again, maybe you know that there are because they've already been put up by other partners. You have a section on another important piece was looking at primary funders. This to me was really interesting, an interesting concept. I don't know that we always get this kind of support from our funders, but it's something that as coalitions receiving different funding from all kinds of sources, maybe that we could bring up to some of our funders. Are they actually helping us to promote a climate of sustainability, doing things like helping us to identify and cooperate with other potential funders that might support this strategy? I know Bill, I asked when Bill brought this up, I was like, what do you mean? Am I supposed to call up my project officer and be like, help me with sustainability? I don't know what you mean by that, Bill. And he said, well, there are things that maybe, let's say your project officer or someone from the funding organization could come out and raise awareness about the strategy and the importance of the work. And you could bring in some other potential key stakeholders, and this funder could help make those connections and really help validate the work that's going on in your community. So again, that was kind of hard for me to conceptualize at first, but is the funder going to actively promote the importance of the strategy? What can our funders do to help us? Make the coalition accountable for sustainability early on in the funding cycle. I think that this is it's always interesting to me, being accountable for yet another thing, right, from our funders. It just kind of feels like there are so many things that they're asking us to do. But I have to say that while many of the funders, I think, in our field might talk about sustainability or the importance of having sustainability plans, oftentimes when they do require them, it's kind of later in the process. And it seems as though the research shows that you should be thinking about this earlier on. So that's kind of the disconnect. And also, What was I going to say? Oh, I just lost my thought.
You're here.
That happens sometimes. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at here is that what are we being asked to do from our funders in terms of being accountable for sustainability? Whether or not our funders are asking us to do that, we should be doing that anyway. And I think the whole idea, one of the ideas behind what we're talking about today, and what we really proposed for the idea for this webinar concept, is that let's not feel like this is just another thing that we have to do. Oh, here's Bill and Andrea telling us, let's create another form. Let's have another, thing that we have to create, this sustainability plan or whatever. Let's just think about these things as we're already spending the time tracking things. We're already spending the time having conversations about these things. Let's just put a little bit of an evidence base into it and see if we can use that information to celebrate sort of our success internally in terms of making our coalition or our organization a better climate for sustainability, and how we've sort of improved on these different things that you're looking at right here. The last piece is the coalition aspects in the research that speak to the importance of an organization and coalition that actively engages in building partnerships continually to support this strategy. One that is constantly pursuing formal commitments around this strategy. I think that's probably the most I want to sort of read and go through the details of this worksheet, but hopefully this conversation has helped to sort of solidify a process for you as far as what you would do when you go home. We're going to review that again with you before the end of the webinar. I think it's time for me to pass it back over to Bill right now to talk about some other things.
Yeah, great. So I was looking at the questions. I do apologize for the poll. I was hoping to actually have it so you could have more than one check, because I think I even said in the question, check all that apply. And then I didn't set it up that way. So I apologize for that. I also want to check the hand raising situation, because there's a bunch of people who have their hand raised. And I know that Andrea had asked you all to raise your hand if you heard her or not. So if you could just put in the chat box if you do have your hand raised, that you do, because we definitely want to have the question, but I don't want to put people on the spot and call on them. If it'd be like, gee, Beth, why don't you tell us what your question is? And then you're like, yeah, I don't have a question. So
yeah, because we have a lot of hands raised.
Yeah, there are a few. So we
could call on our friend Debbie Moskovitz.
Debbie Moskovitz.
Put her on the spot.
So you could put her on the spot. I don't know if she's ready to be put on the spot, but I can unmute her. So I can clear, or I can just. How about if I could just clear out the hands?
I don't know if you can.
You can, and
okay.
See, I can lower people's hands. I have that power to do that.
If anyone has a question or wants to make a comment, just go into the chat box and we'll take a look at it right now. We did give you a lot of information, so this might be a good place to stop. And we're going to monitor the chat box right now, and then we'll unmute you.
Yeah, so right now we're trying to, because for some reason there's a thing that says lower everybody's hands, but then some hands didn't get lowered. So, oh, there we go. Okay, so Deborah's saying, okay.
Debbie doesn't want us to call on her. She says, I should not have my hand raised.
Come on, Debbie. And then there's, I already checked those on top of there. So while we're going through these, if you tell people to double click on the hand, Karina says, if you tell people to double click on the hand, it lowers it.
So double click on your hand if you don't have a question.
Yeah.
We'll continue to monitor this. Bill can we'll work this out.
Yeah,
this is what happens when you try to make an engaging presentation with technology.
Live television. So some things I just wanted to mention very quickly before we moved on to kind of the role of evaluation, and then summarize kind of what the steps are while we're trying to figure all this out. When we're talking about the funder, I thought that was really an interesting place to begin, right? So if you're a DFC grantee, make an effective sustainability plan a requirement to funding. And the issue here is an effective sustainability plan. As I said, I was a trainer for a while. I know that sometimes when you're in the early phase and you're just kind of writing up all this stuff that the grant asks you for, it's not really as good as it could be because you haven't really started doing much yet, right? So maybe you're not sure what your challenges are. So it's important that if if the grant does require a sustainability plan, that once you get things up and rolling, it's really important to kind of recheck in with that and see what that looks like, right? So the other thing about the funder is I think we definitely need to utilize the funder's expertise, right? I mean, funders have a lot of stories. They do a lot of things. They do site visits. When they're doing site visits, as I suggested to Andrea, you could even have them, do a town hall, help you with a town hall and talk about the importance, for example, of in-kind and what that means. I mean, I just did a training session for a coalition, and I have to say that was an aha moment for a lot of community members, that they knew that there was an in-kind requirement for the grant that they were working under. But when I explained why that in-kind was so important to the initiative and why that in-kind was written in, I had a lot of folks in the community who, by the way, immediately after that had volunteered to do stuff because they recognized the value in it, right? Like the coalition wasn't just trying to get them to do stuff, right? Like this was an important piece of the grant initiative. So those kinds of things, for example, a project officer could certainly offer advice or even talk to key leaders in the community about the importance of sustainability and what that might look like. So the idea was, having done a lot of sustainability plans, having graded a lot of sustainability plans, I can tell you that those sustainability plans were didn't have the basis that this provides. And so adding this into your thinking is probably pretty important. And these are the various categories. And of course, what you're going to look for is you're going to look for places where you're really strong and the places maybe that you're not so strong. So let's talk about kind of how we would sync this up with our evaluation. I as Andrea said, we don't want to give people a lot of stuff to do. Like, we know that you're already doing a lot around evaluation. So I think the first place to begin is what level you're at. You always have to begin where you're at. And I refer to this kind of as a level of conversation about this, right? So if you have an evaluation or you're just starting out with an evaluation that maybe you're not getting a lot out of right now, maybe you have, I don't know what kind of evaluation is going on for you all, but there's a kind of evaluation called utility-based evaluation, right? So that means that you're getting reports that are immediately answerable to you. You're able to immediately decide what you need to do next, right? So maybe you don't have that kind of evaluation going on. Maybe you don't want that kind of evaluation. The point is, there are going to be some of you who are not ready to really do a deep dive, right, with your evaluator on this or the evaluation that you're doing. So you probably just want to start at the beginning in terms of, is it worth sustaining? Because what this really starts you to get thinking about, not just does it have you thinking about the prioritization of strategies, which is what most sustainability plans say, like, right, what are the ones we're getting value out of? But it also has you start thinking about components of strategies and thinking about things that might be having an impact in your community just by itself, right? And so starting here at the introductory level, I think, is very helpful. For those of you who have maybe a slightly stronger foundation in evaluation, and certainly this is a direction, if you're an evaluator and you're listening in, you definitely want to at least start at this level if you're an evaluator, because you're familiar with these kinds of concepts. That is, you're going to do both the, is it worth sustaining, and then the climate that supports sustainability tools, right? You're going to do both of those. And you're going to do them in tandem so that you can have conversations about what you need to do to sustain what you're doing. But then there's a higher level, and this is primarily geared towards, I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, right? This is primarily geared towards evaluators who are listening in, and we know that there are a bunch of you out there, because we start getting into the heady stuff, right? This is a really deep dive, and we're going to talk now about what the PSAT is. It is something that was, I think, originally out of St. Louis, I think, in Washington University in St. Louis. We do have that template that's attached here. We have the worksheet attached. and it has all that information on it. But the CDC used it as part of their asthma stuff that they've put out, right? CDC's put out a lot of stuff on evaluation, and most of it was based on this asthma project that they had going on. But they made an addition to this. Let's talk about what this is. So in a way, it's like the worksheet that you guys have all just walked through. In fact, we based that worksheet on this document. Okay, when we created that other one, we used slightly different variables than the CDC did, right? Because the CDC's is much more comprehensive, but it's all based, of course, on previous research. It contains 40, unlike the 20, whatever, 5 or whatever that we have, it contains 40 Likert items, so it asks you to scale them the same way. But it includes probing questions. In other words, the worksheets that we've provided are worksheets that you could just give to somebody and have them fill it out on their own. And then you can tabulate the scores and figure out, are you high or low? Is there general agreement, right? So if you're familiar with evaluation, you know that those are the kinds of things you're looking at, right? Some of the things you're looking at is, are the trends similar among the different groups of your constituents, right? Or do some people view the coalition sustainability climate very differently than others, right? Or is there a miscommunication there? So you're gonna be looking for those kinds of things. So you can hand it to people, have them fill it out, and then assess the data. This scale, however, says that you need to do it face-to-face. It needs to be a face-to-face interview. You walk them through each question, and then as you get to the end of each section, the CDC includes what they call probing questions that you can use to really flesh out details on the answers. So why would this be a deep dive? This is a deep dive, and you really need an experienced evaluator to do this. For a couple of reasons. One, the format of the interview based on a questionnaire is a little tricky. So sometimes it's awkward for people who are not real experienced. The other is the probing questions. Now, the CDC makes suggestions for probing questions, but they're not an extensive list, right? They don't say that you have to ask every probing question. They give you some recommendations. So as an evaluator with experience, as you're going through and you're filling this thing out with somebody that you're interviewing, you got to select and choose the probing questions that you're going to pursue, and then how you're going to record that data. So that's why it's a deep dive, right? This is not the kind of thing you just hand to somebody. And they said that it took about, on average, which means we all know what average means, right? So the average was 80 minutes, which, those of you who are familiar with interviews knows that means you're looking down the barrel of at least a handful of 2-hour interviews here at this, right? So you're going to have some 1-hour interviews, and you're going to have some 2-hour interviews. And again, that's a pretty deep dive for evaluation. So it's pretty important. So
this is why we adapt things the way we do.
Yeah, right. I mean, that was our primary purpose in adapting. As soon as I saw the 80 minutes, I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to have a coalition coordinator agreeing to have 10 interviews at an average of 80 minutes each, and then trying to record and make sense of all that data. That is a disaster waiting to happen. Not good. Much better use of your time than doing that. So if you have an experienced evaluator, you may want to talk to them about doing this, right? And have conversations, the typical conversations that an evaluator should be able to lead, which we'll talk about right now, right? So as I said, it's not self-administered. See, I forgot to look for the period. So the role of evaluator then, and this is both for evaluators and for those of you who are using evaluators, right? So what should this look like as you start to implement it? So the first is familiarize everybody with the research, make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of what these indicators are. As you said, all the indicators are written on the worksheets, and I did provide you the citations, so anybody can go in and check out. Now, the other thing is you need to be having this conversation with somebody. You need to be having, I'm sorry, I got distracted by Curtis, who's saying stuff. Anyway, so you need to know people, you need to have involved in this conversation people who know what kind of data you're collecting already, because the indicators are there's probably some cross-reference already. You're probably already collecting indicators for some of these sustainability issues, right? So the next step then is, if there are, depending on what level you're going to be working at, there may be indicators that are missing that are important for understanding about sustainability. So, and the role of an evaluator is to kind of pick and choose what are the data sources that we currently have, what are some of the data sources that we might need, and then of course to develop a collection plan for that data. I think it's also important for the evaluator to be an important part of the conversation around the level of assessment that's needed, right? And we're going to base this on the capacity of the organization. Does, who on the coalition has a strong understanding of sustainability or strong understanding of research-based or of evaluation? Who has a strong understanding of indicators, right, and what that means? Who can help develop data collection plans? Is the organization basically just now currently overwhelmed with the data that they're collecting, even though they may not be collecting all the data they need? It's important for an evaluator to be able to look at the big picture and say, can we really collect more here? And if we can't, then let's be very careful about choosing what we're gonna collect next, right? And then the last thing that I think is really helpful for the role of an evaluator is to be able to design reports that can be used as tools. Because now that we know what the indicators are around sustainability, we can design specific reports on data that help us align with those indicators, right? So, for example, one of the things that's correlated with sustainability is this idea of lobbying and advocacy for the program, right? So we know that, for example, our local representatives may have a certain interest in some of these things. And so we're going to write maybe a one-page report or even a one-paragraph report that meets their needs, because we know that lobbying and advocacy for the program or for the approach is an important piece of sustainability that we want to pursue, right? So it's important that evaluators are on board. And evaluation is not just about knowing what data to put in, but it's also about knowing how to communicate that data. So that's a conversation that evaluators certainly can lead. And I put this up as an example. I know we have some DFC folks in the house today, and this probably looks familiar. Some of you are probably breaking out into some type of goosebumps or hives or something looking at this, but reporting time is coming up. But this is, for example, one of the things that directly correlates, right? So one of the indicators of sustainability, one of the elements of sustainability is to be able to have a variety of funds, right? That's one of the things that correlates with sustainability. And here you have in DFC, every quarter you have to report out on where your funds are coming from. So the point of this is you already have that data available. You've been reporting on that data already. You don't have to go out and get that, right? So again, you're going to have some things that you're able to do because it's just a natural part of the process. So sorry, we're both trying to. So where do we start? Now what, right? So we have a starting line, and again, we don't want folks to have to recreate stuff. First, let's think about the evaluator staff conversation, right? We're talking about the importance of the evaluator. What are some things that you should be talking about? If you're going to set up an agenda for this meeting or this conversation, what should you be talking about? Some things you should be talking about. What's the kind of data that you currently have, right? Do you need more data on certain strategies? I know that sometimes what happens is there are some strategies that are data heavy in the sense that we can collect, it's easy to collect a lot of data on some strategies, and other strategies it's not so easy. Right, so we're thinking about strategy. We're thinking about data pertaining to sustainability. So we might have a lot of data on strategies that, maybe we're not getting a lot of impact off of, and maybe we're thinking maybe that's not real important to sustain. We may have other things that are much more important that maybe we're not gathering as much data on. So important to have that conversation in terms of what kinds of data are you collecting for each kind of strategy, right? Are you collecting what you need? The big conversation here is how can we use the existing data that we're collecting, using the data reports that you already have, right? The DFC me stuff, for example. And the other is, these templates aren't etched in stone. We made them up except for the last one, right? So the last one, and the last one, by the way, is not proprietary, right? It's available on the internet, and they tell you that you can adapt and adjust. Of course, there are reliability, validity issues when you do that, but just keeping in mind that there may be certain language that your community is not comfortable with or may not understand, whatever, So the conversation with the evaluator, who again should have a pretty good feel for the capacity of the coalition and the capacity of the community, should we adapt those templates? And then we're going to start gathering coalition and community views by using the worksheets that we provided, right, now that we've had these conversations. Some tips on how you do this: start now. That's big letters and stuff with an exclamation point, because it's never too early, it's never too late to start talking about sustainability. Sustainability is an easy sell if you can demonstrate impact or value, right? I mean, out of all the things that you're going to do, if you can demonstrate impact, sustainability is usually a no-brainer in terms of that. I think Andrea wanted to address that. You want to do it now? You want me to keep on?
Well, I was just pointing out that as data people, we think about impact as being sort of, can we demonstrate, are we able to demonstrate that this particular strategy is actually contributing to the population level outcomes that our coalition or our group is trying to achieve? And I was just kind of pointing out that not everyone, unfortunately, is able to do that, and that things, you can make a sustainability sell easily also when someone in the community thinks it's valuable or thinks it's a fun thing to do. Obviously, we want to base what we do on data, but the more I work in a community, the more I understand the fact that not everybody has the same brain that I have and thinks the same way. Sometimes people just think things are really exciting and valuable, and if you find that it's useful and will contribute to outcomes, maybe it's not required that you can actually demonstrate that, but that's what I was pointing out.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we often think about impact just in terms of numbers, right? And I think that's the point, right? The point is, look, you're already doing things in your community. Some of them will be more science-based than others, but let's not pretend as evaluators, I think, in an evaluation, let's not pretend that communities are just doing, real scientifically based approaches to things. Sometimes they're doing things that are on the periphery of that, right? So there are things that are being done on the outside of kind of effectiveness, or maybe right on the borderline, and that's okay, because maybe there are other benefits to doing that besides just the numbers. Something that brings the community together, for example, something that enhances the capacity of the community to deal with issues, something that keeps the fire and the passion up. One of the things about sustainability, if you look at that 26 question grid, right, is one of the things is there passion in the community about the issue, right? And so there are some things that we do just because we want to keep that passion up, because that's an important piece of sustainability. And then the other thing is, this is also listed in the sustainability checklist. Like, do you have internal and external champions? And in terms of thinking how this work should be done, like, who should be thinking about sustainability? This is not something that I think should necessarily fall on staff, right? Because you're going to have people in your community, as Andrea just said, who are somehow emotionally attached to some of these strategies or some of these approaches that are going on in your community. Use that passion and have a conversation with them about the importance of wanting to make sure that this thing continues in the community. And they're going to agree with you because they're already emotionally attached to it. So they're going to be like, yes, we do need to keep this going on. And just say to that person, let's provide a little bit of training for this person. Let them take the lead on sustainability. Sustainability is not a checklist, okay? In the sense that, you don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to go find sustainability for this project, right? It takes time to develop and nurture, because you need to understand what needs to be sustained, how it needs to be sustained, where are you willing to cut corners if you need to, who are the people in the community that care about sustainability, so it takes time to develop that. I think the last piece of advice that's not written, I would say, is that, if you're doing a comprehensive strategy and that's obviously a lot of components, like I get that, right? So you could have, even if you only have 4 or 5 strategies going on, each strategy may have 10 components to it. Don't do this all at once, right? pick one to work on this month or for the next 2 months or whatever, to think about what kind of information are we bringing in about this strategy? Who are the people that care about this kind of strategy? It's not something that has to be done all at once. There's a deadline out there, right? And that's when the primary funding ends. That's the deadline. But, unless you're staring down the barrel of that deadline, you have time to be working on these, especially if you distribute the workload out to the community or the coalition, right? So you don't have to worry about kind of finding sustainability for everything if you're a coalition coordinator. So that's really kind of what we have on this. So, I mean, what we did was a lot. We introduced this topic. We talked about the key themes of research, and we talked about the role of evaluation. Now, I want to do some answers to questions. I know that Andrea has been looking through some of this, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Yeah, I think we have a few extra minutes. I think sometimes the most interesting parts of some of these webinars is when somebody asks a question and we can just sort of on the fly answer it, or someone makes a great comment. And I know that one of the things that people have been asking us is for more engagement on the webinars. So we have a number of hands that look like they're raised. I'd ask if maybe all of you could just take a moment to look at your control panel and see if your hand is raised. Maybe double click on that round icon that has the hand and the arrow, so that you can take it down if it's not raised right now. If it is, I think I'm gonna see if anybody wants to maybe make a comment, and we can unmute somebody. So let me just give people a moment to
I think
do what
there's
they
just
need
one.
to do. So, all right. So I'm going to unmute Anna Gazinski. And even if you don't have something, a certain question, maybe you can just say hello. Let's test this out. Anna, you should be unmuted.
You're live.
Okay, I'm gonna mute Anna. Let's just see if we can hear anyone on this. Beth, you have your hand raised. Beth Ketchum, we're gonna unmute you. Okay, you should be able to talk in. Oh,
I hear noise.
Beth.
Yeah, this is Beth. I unintentionally raised my hand, but hello.
Well, did you have any thoughts? We don't want to put you on the spot completely, but it's exciting to hear someone else's voice except ours.
Well, this is something that we've been working on here in Elizabethtown with our evaluator. I, as a newer person to the industry, often feel very overwhelmed by the language and the lingo and the technicalness of it. But I think when we take a look at the handouts that you gave us and we sit down and go through those, that they will be really useful in our sustainability plan, which is something that we are gearing up to do this month. So it's very timely. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Beth. It's great to hear your thoughts. We just unmuted Beth. I'm going to go to...
Say hi to Gail.
Yes. We know Gail. I'm going to say hi to Cindy Hillier. I'm going to unmute you, Cindy, because I think you have your hand raised. Are you on the line?
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah. Cindy, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but we're having a fire drill inside our...
That's what that is. I'm muting you right now.
Okay, again. I'm so sorry. I'll have to ask another...
Yeah, put it in the chat box, Cindy. You can always type it out in the chat box. Sorry.
Okay, Deb Ruin. There's some comedy relief here. Okay, I'm unmuting Deb Ruin. Do you have a comment or a question?
Not right at this time, no. It's good information and good tools that you gave us. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome, Deb.
Okay.
No worries.
Judith Sumner. I'm going to unmute you right now. Do you have a comment or a question for us? It's just fun to hear everybody, or at least the background sounds going on in their office. I don't know that Judith, we're going to unmute you right now. Kendra McLaughlin, we're going to unmute you. And if anyone has anything that they want to type in, Kendra, you're on the line. Stephanie Scott said, great presentation and tools. I don't know if, Bill, you have any closing comments or thoughts?
No, I think that some people are having trouble opening the PDF, and I guess we haven't gotten to the last slide yet, but certainly if there are any, if there's anything that you think about later, I know it's kind of tough to just sit and listen, and it's a lot of information to absorb, but if as you look at these tools in greater detail, or you think about the research, as I said, if you want to talk about what's in those research articles, please feel free to drop us a note, and we'll certainly touch base with you. I'd say we probably do at least 5 to 10 conversations we have with folks during the couple weeks after a webinar. People will reach out to us, and so we will have conversations with folks. That's not a problem. So if you need something, just let us know.
And Jerry Bennett made a comment. Hey, Jerry, can I unmute you? I know you didn't raise your hand, but I know you, and I think it'd be great if you made a comment about what you just said. So, Jerry, are you on the line? Jerry, you were talking about how there's more to it than just money, and now we're putting you on the hook. Do you want to say hi and make a comment about your thoughts on all of this?
No. It's like, no.
All right. So there's a lot
yeah.
of people's hands raised. It's fun to go through this. I think we need to work a little bit more on our end. I know we're losing some people, but I want to make sure that if anyone has questions, we'll answer them. So stay on the line. I think some people do have a couple of questions, but before I go through them, I just wanted to point out the next webinar is on Wednesday, January 11th. From 12 to 1:15. The topic is still being determined. There's going to be an evaluation that's going to go out to everybody. We are going to be asking you what kinds of topics you'd like to hear next. We appreciate your feedback because we really do use that. If there's anything that you just want to have a chat with us about, you have a question. I know one person mentioned that there's some kind of pushback around just general data collection in the school system. That wasn't exactly the topic of the webinar today, but Bill and I offered that we can set up a time to talk to this person about that conversation and what to do, because as I'm sure that probably resonates with a lot of you. It's not, this person is not alone in that.
So before we have folks coming off, there's a couple of things I want to do. Also, one of our goals is to have people talk to each other. And so over the last couple of months, we've had folks provide resources who are actually working in coalitions or doing evaluation, and they go, hey, I have a cool resource that might be. So we have a request out there. Karina has a request. She says that she's in a year 3 DFC. And she wants to know if we have any examples of sustainability plans, good sustainability plans that you can see as a reference. So instead of me saying yes, what I'd like to do is open it up and say, if there's anyone out there who has a sustainability plan, maybe someone out there who's actually, who's been using a sustainability plan for a while because maybe you've had a shift in funding. If you could be nice enough to let us know that, then we can provide that for people.
We can reach out to you and then give it back to the group.
Yeah. So, and the other thing you should know is that if we don't address your comment right here, all the comments are stored so that when we go in and we look at the report for the webinar, we can flesh those questions out and we can address them directly. So, Karina, thank you for that. A couple other questions. The worksheets in more readable form, Steve, just let us know, reach out to us, and we can do that. So I think, and so there's a couple of people asking about having a basic sustainability discussion with your evaluator. Absolutely, because your evaluator supposedly, right, is the person that's responsible for collecting all this data that you might be able to use. And remember that the data plays an important role in terms of being able to develop partnerships, in terms of being able to improve capacity, in terms of being able to provide education, for example, to the community and to government and all that. So absolutely, I was thinking of, there's this Keanu Reeves movie where Al Pacino plays the devil. I don't know if anybody's seen that, right? But he plays Satan and he's in the law, and Keanu Reeves asks him, why are you in the law? And he says it's because the law is in everything. That's how I look at evaluation. It's in everything. So if you have questions about any part of the SPIF, I think it's appropriate to have conversations with an evaluator about kind of how you may measure your progress in that area. Absolutely. And I know there were a couple other things. We had a question about where we're located. If you don't know, we're in lovely Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour outside Philadelphia. So just so you know where we are. Do we use results-based accountability as a framework? Yes, I have used results-based accountability. I've used multiple models, actually. So that's one of them, real important one. Let's see.
Someone offered to maybe share their sustainability plan. Deborah, thank you so much. We'll get back to you. Some people have asked about the PowerPoint presentation and the handouts. I'm going to be putting an email together. You'll all get the message, and you will be able to then have access to everything that we provided. And just respond if for some reason you're still unable to open them properly. So anyway, we are probably going to go ahead and pretty much close at that. We're going to review everything and get back to people who have made some private comments to us and questions.
Did you talk about the date of the next webinar?
Yes, I did talk about the date of the webinar.
Just off
We
my
do
notes.
archive the webinars. Thank you, Debbie, for the nice comments. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much for the 90-some people who stuck through this last
couple
fun
minutes
kind of ad hoc.
Happy holidays to everybody. Everybody
Yeah.
enjoy. I just have to share for a moment that my daughter, you know, her mom is Jewish, so she's used to celebrating 2 holidays. She is not happy that they overlap this year. I'm just saying that she's a little worried that she's going to get fewer presents this year because they overlap. So everybody have a happy holiday. We look forward to speaking with you on January 11th. We'll be sending out an evaluation thing shortly. Please give us ideas. Some people put ideas in the chat box already, which we're going to be looking at. Thanks for joining us and letting us do what we love to do, which is this. So take care.
Aren't you going to say what you always say?
Oh yeah, I guess I could say what I always say, which is, as a 2-time coalition coordinator, both for an inner city coalition and a suburban coalition, I know how crazy things get. But as the Eagles once sang, take it easy. Don't let the sound of your own wheels drive you crazy. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.